Alright, welcome back to Plastic Models by a Regular Dude and the FW, the Revell 132nd scale FW190 F8 project. Today I'm going to get started on building this thing. So without further ado, let me get some parts out, get to work. Alright, the first part here, step 1 and 2. Is looks like drilling out the holes for the particular aircraft you're wanting to model. Okay, you've got A, which is 2 drop tanks, single bomb, or you've got B, which is the 4 bombs, 1 bomb in the middle. So I need to kind of figure out which one I'm going to do. I think I have to refer to my references, and then so it shows you where first it shows to drill the holes for the base, which I'm not going to be using, and then to drill out for the various weapons and or drop tanks. So I'm going to take a look at that real quick and see which one it is I am going to be doing. Alright, after a quick perusal of what little there is online pertaining to this particular aircraft, and going off of what is on the decal sheet itself, the decal, can't see it as well in this little one, but it shows the single pod, or yeah, the single pylon on the wings for the drop tanks. And then in a picture of FW190 Lorker standing by an FW190, supposedly an earlier plane that he flew, the previous plane he flew, it also shows the same. So, you know, the only photos of this plane that exist are it's crashed and you can't see anything underneath the fuselage. So I am going to be going with scheme A. That's the best educated guess I can make, so that's what I'm going to do. So scheme B is out, and what I will be doing is I'll go through the instructions real quick like, and scratch out all of the B scheme pages so I don't accidentally mess up. So I'm going to go through the instructions and do that real quick and come back. Alright, my instructions all ready to go. Now I'm ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my pin vise and start drilling out the holes for the A version on the wings here. So I'm going to do that. Then I am going to go ahead and start assembling the cockpit, which is the first part. I'm going to start assembling that, checking in any painting I need to do and everything else. So I'm going to start working all this, and as I come across, you know, any weirdness or fit issues or just comments I want to make about a given part, I will chime in on the video here and talk a little bit about it. Right now would be a good time to mention one of the things that's kind of crazy about these Revell kits. Now, I am used to working on, say, Dragon or Tamiya, stuff like that, and their parts layout is pretty intuitive. Each sprue is labeled with a letter, and then on that sprue the parts are numbered, generally in numerical, some kind of numerical order. So you might have sprue B that's, you know, 1 through 30. Sprue C is, you know, 1 through 10, whatever. It just kind of makes sense. You can go to you know, the parts call out will say E5. So you go to, or let's say L 58. So you go to L and find 58. There's your part. Awesome. Well, Revell, they've got all their sprues marked with a letter, but their numbering is just like crazy. For instance, there's no duplicate numbers, and it's basically, you know, if there's, you know, 200 parts on a kit, looks like 100, let's say 168 parts, looks like, no, 179. We'll say 179, there could be more, because there's no way to tell. It's numbered 1 through 179, but they're all over the place. You got, on this sprue here, you got part number 10, part number 30 and 31. Here you've got 28, 25, 24, 35, 36. You know, they're just nuts. So for example, this part right here, and they don't give you a letter and a number. So you've got part 59. So you got to look all over your parts sprues, and it happens to be on sprue, where's the letter F? Sprue F is where part number 59 is, which is the linkage for the rudder controls, looks like. Okay? Alright, so we cut that part off. Next part is 58. Is it anywhere on sprue F near 59? No. It's on these little sprue L's, number 58. And they're numbered thusly: 170, 154, 169, 169, 167, 179, 58, 173. So I don't know. It's crazy. It's not that big a deal. I just find it funny. And, you know, if you're building this thing, just be prepared to look all over all your sprues. Just really, you'll get really good at identifying parts by the shape. So anyway, neither here nor there. It's just one of those things. It's not a deal breaker for the kit. Some people really hate it. Some people could care less. I'm pretty much indifferent. I just find it amusing that that's the kind of numerical and lettering system they have. So that's that. I'm going to continue on working on this, and I'll come back. All right, here's a little note. I put the I got the rudder pedals and the linkage cut out, and decided I would use a bit of photo etch scraps and made some toe straps, I should say, for the rudder pedals. Very easy. A little bit extra detail there, even though you won't see it once it's installed. I thought I would do it because I just like to stay in practice with that kind of stuff. So, on with the project. Alright, the cockpit is done with the awesome seatbelt set by Basic Line, and the parts are really super tiny, the photo etch parts, but once you kind of get the hang of what you're doing, I used this to hold the buckles as I threaded the actual seat belts through the buckles, so it actually went together pretty easy once I got all that figured out. So I put it in there, and then I used their suggestion and used just a clear acrylic over the whole thing, and then just did a light wash, which really kind of enhances the texture a bit. So the cockpit is done. Now, one thing that I want to note on this cockpit and the decals: the instrument panel decals work fine on the instrument panels. Okay, as you can hopefully see right there, they work good, and they line up well with the raised detail on the instrument panel. However, these decals here, which are first supposed to be for the sides of the tub, I tried and tried. I looked at all kinds of pictures and everything, and I don't understand what they were trying to accomplish here, because none of the decal colors line up with any of the detail on on the sides here. It's just really weird.
Yes.
And so on both sides, I just, you know, that is my first disappointment here, and I'm not digging it. Not digging it at all. Yeah, it doesn't match in any way, shape, or form. So, you know, I didn't use those. I just looked at some photos and did some light painting. I'm gonna hit it with just a little bit of a silver highlight to kind of make the details pop a little bit more, and see how that works. I did some chipping on the seats, on the sides. Did rub some silver to simulate, you know, wear. I have to paint my straps here on those. Well, I'm probably not even gonna do that because you're not even gonna be able to see them. They're so far back in there you cannot even see those details. But it was fun making the straps. A little bit of light chipping there. Other than that, the cockpit is done. So the next part I'm going to do is I'm going to paint some of the RLM02 here and here, and then I can, and a couple of these other parts that are supposed to have that color. And then after I do that, I can actually put the start putting the fuselage together, because that's the next step, which is step 16. I can get that put together, and then I can do the, you know, install the cockpit and start working on the front end. I've also got, I started on jumped ahead to step 19, 20, 19 and 20. 21's next, which is the gear, landing gear base. But I got all this in place, and it all fit together really nicely. This part right here was a little bit warped, but just a little bit of pressure and putting the glue on, and it worked out great. So all that looks really nice, and that is ready to go. So I'll do these parts next, and then start putting the fuselage together, and we'll come back and take a look at what I've done. Alright, welcome back. Plastic Models by Regular Dude and the Revell 132nd scale FW190 F8 project. Got more construction going on and stuff. Here's where I set the wing assembly has been completed. The lower wings, the landing gear bays, the engine mount, and as you can see, I've got that painted the appropriate color, RLM2, according to my sources and according to the instructions. Got the inside of the flaps painted on the wings. Pretty much anything that I can paint in the RLM2 I have done, including the tail gear there, the inside of the engine area on the fuselage. I've started cementing the back of the fuselage together, and so it looks like a really good fit. And just one thing I want to make note of here real quick. Well, let me show you. I also got the cockpit is ready to go to be installed, as well as the front gun sight and upper instrument panel. So those are all ready to go into the fuselage. Now, one thing I want to make note of is the way I cement a fuselage together. Now, there's a lot of people, and I'm not saying my way is the right way. This is just the way that works for me. Otherwise, I would be just amazingly frustrated. To get everything, I like to get everything as closely aligned as possible to minimize the amount of material I might need to remove to clean up seams. So what I do is there's natural break points in a fuselage. Like, for instance, you have this section here, and if you're careful, it will end right there at that little kind of crook. That's one spot, and then from here to the top is another spot. From here to here is by itself. From here to here, from here to here, and then right here. So, well, right here to here, and then there to there. So what I try and do in order to simplify things, and it takes a little bit longer because I don't like wrapping tape and rubber bands and junk all over the place. I like to do it in sections. And I did this section first, and I don't know if you can see on the camera, but there is a very small amount of melted dissolved plastic from the to me extra thin. I line the whole thing with the cement, and then I hold it together, making sure it stays as lined up as humanly possible. That way I get a nice, this side is level in relation to this with a little bead of the plastic. So then it's just a matter of lightly sanding or scraping even with a knife that down, and then sanding it smooth and not having to worry about so much sanding to get it flush and maybe having it lopsided. So that's what I like to do whenever I do a fuselage. It just seems to work well for me. And you know, once I do that, then I can do that little section there, which I did. And then next I'll do this part here, clamp it together once it's tight, cured. Then I'll do this part here, and then I'll do here and ultimately here, and then that way it's all lined up really nice. Minimal cleanup, rescribe the panel lines if necessary, and I'm ready to move on to the next portion. So that's just a little quick note on how I do things there. So anyway, that's that. I'm gonna work some more on this. Then I have to install this part here and this part here, and that's another note. This part here, according to the instructions, it recommends on one side of the fuselage installing the tail gear and that small instrument panel dashboard kind of thing with the gun sight on one side. The way this thing is set up, that is not necessary. I can get this all secured, done, then I can simply pop this into place without having to worry about, you know, keeping the rear end of the aircraft aligned while I'm trying to, you know, line everything up. So I can put this in here, get it lined up really nice, squeeze it together, make sure it fits like it's supposed to, and then apply the cement. I'm good to go. Then I can install the cockpit and move on to the front end. But that's just, you know, something to keep in mind. It makes it a little easier to install this in a way that it's not a real headache trying to keep everything lined up and, you know, having it fit real snug on one side and not on the other. So with that, I will move on, glue some more stuff together, and come back and take a look. Alright, so let's see, where did I leave off? I'm not sure. I've got all the flaps. I've got the rear stabilizers. In progress. I just cement one side at a time and move around. I've got the flap, or not the flaps, but the ailerons. Ailerons have been glued together. I need to do a little bit of filling along the edges, the trailing edges. Need to fill those, sand those. I got the stabilizer elevators are done. I need to do a little bit of light filling and sanding on those. So those are all ready to go. The wings, I think I mentioned this already, but I've got the flaps, so those are ready. This part is done. Now, as I mentioned, this cockpit isn't glued in yet. But as I mentioned, I think earlier, the instructions indicate that you should glue that upper instrument panel into one side, and the tail wheel assembly, and then put the parts together. Well, anytime I've done that, and I was afraid it was going to happen with this kit too, You do that and it comes up off center. So what I did is I glued the fuselage together, and then after that it cured like it should. Then I glued this into place because, you know, just, I mean, the whole front from here up is just flexible. So I was able to put that in, get it centered up nicely, glue it in, make sure it was nice and solid. Now I can do the cockpit. So is that the only way to do it? No, but that's the way I chose to do it, just so it would stay symmetrical. So next thing I got to do here is I need to glue this cockpit in. And once I get that glued in, then I can move on to the gun platform and work some more on this other stuff. And then once all this cures up, then I can actually install it onto the wing section. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that and come back in a little while and mention any pitfalls or weird stuff or anything like that, or just to catch you up on what's going on. All right, let us review. Okay, so last things I was working on was all the flaps, or I'm sorry, the ailerons, the rudder, and the elevators. I've got them all put assembled, and the trailing edge, well, all the edges sanded to get rid of the seam. And just a quick comment on those. One of the complaints I have read about this kit is the trailing edges of the ailerons and elevators and all that, and even the wing, I guess. One of the complaints is that the scale thickness is just horrendous. It's just way too thick. As you can see here, that is a pretty good thickness going on. Not as sharp as it would be or should be. So, you know, it could be fixed, I suppose, by you know, sanding it and tapering it down, but you'd have to take off a lot of material to do that, and that would pretty much destroy this rib detail that's on here. So this is one of those things where you have to determine if you want to do that, or there might even be aftermarket available by now. I don't know. I haven't looked, and I'm not really that concerned about it. For my purposes, I can live with the extra thickness. Some may say that's the coward's way out, or, you know, being lazy or whatever, but I'm okay with that thickness. So they will work, and, you know, it's not going into contest, it's not going for public display or anything like that. It's just going to go on a shelf in my house for me to look at when I want to. So I'm okay with it. So then we've got the rudder, which looks to be a little bit better as far as, you know, the tail end of it, because I don't think they're really knife edge like, say, those other parts would be. But it all went together, you know, everything lined up great. You know, used my usual method for assembling stuff like this. Did it a section at a time, clamped it really well. Let a little bit of the melted glue or melted plastic ooze out a little bit, and then was able to scrape that off and sand it smooth when it kind of fills it at the same time. So that looks good. A few touch-ups here and there. Once I get it primed, I'll be able to tell better if I need more, you know, sanding or filling or whatever, but they're good so far. Now for the main part, and that is the fuselage here. Attaching this whole assembly, which includes the motor mount and everything, onto the fuselage. Now the instructions say to install, as I mentioned in the earlier segment, is to install this upper instrument panel and the tail wheel assembly on this side of the aircraft, and then put the other side together. That works okay for the tail wheel assembly, and that's what I did. However, for this part, I like to, you know, I don't build a whole lot of aircraft models, but the times I have, I've found that when I assemble it like it says to do in the instructions, where you put everything on one side and then put it together, it's usually not symmetrical. So what I did is I put it together, and since from here up, both top and bottom, splays out pretty easily, I was able to put that in place, clamp it, and tape it, so it's nice and snug, and then apply the cement from underneath, held in place really well. So in the cockpit, I did the same thing. I popped into place. There's two locating tabs. There's two locating tabs right in here somewhere, I believe. And I popped those in place, had it upside down, and had finger pressure on this to hold it up against the ridge on the inside of the fuselage here. Applied the cement, clamped it to hold it tight. Then what I did is, after that cured, I held this portion of the cockpit, you know, tension up against this part where it rests, applied cement in there, and let that cure up. Then after I did that, on the sides here where the instrument, the side instrument panel contacts the side of the fuselage, I used a clamp and squeezed the fuselage together and ran some cement on the inside to give that a real snug fit, because, you know, I could see a little, not that you would after it was all assembled, but I could see daylight through there, so it wasn't touching. So I wanted to make sure it was all nice and snug. So once I did that, it was on to putting on this whole assembly here, which really worked really well. And the way I do it, and I'll explain the way I do it on any fuselage type things, is I found the best way to do it for me is just to do it section by section. You know, test fit it, squeeze it all together, make sure everything lines up properly. But before I start throwing down with some glue and stuff like that, on the whole thing, I again do it in segments. So what I did is I got it aligned evenly on the fuselage, just this tail portion here, and then applied cement and made sure it was squeezed up tight. Once that dried, then I moved on to these flanges right here, where the wing flange or fillet or whatever it's called on the fuselage contacts the lower part. I again used clamps, clamped it really tight, ran my cement in there to get a really super firm bond, so whenever I go to do any sanding, it's going to look really nice and neat with no gaps. And if there was any slight misalignment, I was able to squeeze that in and equalize it to where equal amounts of sanding will be done on one side and the other. So then after that, before I installed the wing, I installed this upper part here, and the way I did it, I got it in place, clamped it here, ran my cement. Once that was cured, then I worked on the wings. I forgot all about the gun platform there. So up here, there's a lot of contact points. There is, you know, everything connects all through here, but the primary part that holds it together is this seam right here. And when it was all, and then also the side of the motor mount framing here, there's locating tabs that go into slots in the side of the fuselage here and here. So the first thing I did was glue those. I clamped it together and made sure these were lined up. I had to kind of pull one up in there to make sure it snapped in place. Made sure this was clamped tightly. Did my cement and let it sit overnight. Then I was able to clamp kind of a crossways method like this to squeeze that together and keep it flush, the bottom part and the upper part here, and did my cement. Did one side. Once that was done, then I did the other side. So I have a nice, firm, solid, even assembly going on. So now all I have to do is fill in that seam right there on both sides, check my references to see how this is supposed to look here, and fill any seams that need to be filled, and then I can sand it and it will be ready to move on to putting the wings on, the upper wings. So that's where I am with this so far. So with that, I'm going to call this video done, and I will pick up on the next steps, which will be that filling and the upper wing assemblies on the next video. So as always, thank you for joining me on Plastic Models by a Regular Dude in the FW190 project. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, tips, hints, anything, put them in the comments below, and I will see you all next time.